Dr. Raghuram Rajan, Dr. Rohit Lamba, fellow Manthanites and friends, I heartily welcome you all for this event at Manthan. On this occasion, I would like to reminisce a bit. Sometime in 2012, me and Ajay Gandhi were discussing who we should get to Manthan, come what may. After some discussions, we zeroed in on two names. Dr. Raghuram Rajan was one of them. We asked our strong supporter, mentor, Sri Y.V. Reddy Garu, to write to Raghuram Rajan, and we have been waiting to hear him in person since then. Of course, we had him speak to Manthan on a during COVID on a Zoom session. He spoke to us on why liberal democracy is necessary for Indian development. And I think that is still needed today, more than ever before. But as all of us would have realized, today more than ever, there is no better thing than an in-person conversation. We are fortunate to be that a part of our dream has been realized. Thank you, sir, for being with us. I also welcome Rohit Lamba to make it to Manthan along with Dr. Raghuram Rajan. All I can say is, we would like to use the good offices of Mr. Raghuram Rajan to realize our second part of the dream, to get Barack Obama to Manthan. Ajay would have loved that. While we wait for Obama, I would like to mention that this is our 457th event at Manthan after it first started in September 2005. We just concluded our 11th annual Manthan Samvad, where more than 1,500 people attended on October 2nd. We thank each one of you for participating in that. Our first event was by Professor Aditya Mukherjee. He spoke on Nehruvian socialism to Manmohanomics. Yes, we discussed Nehru even before 2014. I would like to say that. Me and Ajay had divergent opinions on Nehru's economics and thought that this was a good topic to start Manthan. It is in this spirit that we started Manthan, to be a platform of open debate, open doors, open minds. I would hazard to say that as long as there is scope for logic, reasoning, and debate, the possibilities of overthrowing authoritarian tendencies remain. All Manthan events, as you all know, are free for the audience, which permits all of you, all of us, to attend it easily. I would think that this is what sets apart Manthan. Of course, what it sets apart also is the samosa, Usmania biscuit and chai, and the tree at Vidyaranya, which we sadly miss today. I must profusely thank Mufakamja College to have gracefully accepted to host this meeting. We have survived 18 years through the generous voluntary contributions of the support of our audience, who are our pillars of strength. I would also like to thank each one of our members in the advisory board who support the idea of Manthan with such passion and dedication. In particular, I would like to thank Sunita, who really pushed hard to have this event here in this occasion. I can claim with confidence that we are the only institution in the country that provides this space free and continues to attract large, diverse audience such as this. It is the eclectic Hyderabad audience, filled with people across all ages, classes, professions, businessmen, retirees, who have made Manthan a great institution. Thank you, fellow Manthanites, for that. I am deeply grateful to the authors of the book to have chosen Manthan in Hyderabad to present a refreshing view, breaking the mold, reimagining India's economic future. I would recommend that each one of you buy the book, which is there at the counter behind you. The authors need no introduction, but I'll still do the honors. Rohit is an assistant professor of economics at Pennsylvania State University. and a visiting assistant professor of economics at New York University, Abu Dhabi. He received a PhD in economics from Princeton and was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Cambridge. He publishes regularly in leading academic journals and newspapers. He also worked as an economist at the office of the Chief Economic Advisor at the Government of India. I didn't have time to talk to Rohit, frankly. I suspect that he worked with Raghuram Rajan when he was the CEA. I'm not sure of that. Raghuram Rajan is, of course, the renowned scholar economist. All of us know of his brilliant academic achievements, the high posts he held in his career, and more important, the insight and wisdom he brought to every post he has held. He has combined deep research in economics, which influenced financial and macroeconomic policies around the world. His latest honor is the honorary doctorate from the London School of Economics. He has been central to the argument of growth versus development, structures of financial markets. He was right in predicting the financial meltdown of 2008 and critical of demonetization, and argues for the higher involvement of government in health and education. Before I ask my colleague Ramanohar to start the conversation after the presentation by Mr. Raghuram Rajan, I would like Anupama to give a bouquet to the speakers.
Everyone, thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you all here. It's with great sadness that I remember Mr. Ajay Gandhi and his various emails over time. He got Dr. Y.V. Reddy to write to me and say, you should come, and once I heard from both of them, I determined someday I would be here. Fortunately, Dr. Reddy is here today, and sir, thanks for coming. Distinguished guests, what I want to give you is an outline of the book that Rohit and I have written. We start with the following question: is India surging with, just having overtaken the United Kingdom as the 5th largest economy in the world? And if you look at the last 2 quarters of growth, we are in the 7.5% growth region. Or is India flailing, unable to employ the many millions who are entering the labor force? If you look at Indian labor force participation, it is very low. You look at female labor force participation, it's the lowest in the G20. So which side is it? Is the cup half full, or is the cup half empty? Or depending on which side you're on, it's full and it's empty. Now, another way of thinking about this is that, well, by the way, everybody at this point will quote eminent economist Joan Robinson from Cambridge, who said, everything you can say about India, the opposite is also true. And to some extent, these different views of India today reflect that, and they can actually both be true at the same time. But I want to set the question a little differently. Our Prime Minister has said 2047, 100 years after independence, is going to be Amrit Kal. In other words, it is going to be an era of plenty, which I understand to mean we want to be a developed nation. That's an important ambition. Having a high ambition challenges the country and makes it move faster, right? So let's do the math. Today, India's growth potential is about 6% a year, GDP growth. Now, typically, that also includes the fact that we have a growing labor force, a growing population. But let's say our population stays flat, and we grow at 6% for 24 years. 24 years will take us to 2047, Amrit Kal. How rich will we be in 24 years if we go at 6% a year with no population growth. So all the growth goes in increasing each one's income, okay? If you do the math, at 6% a year, you double every 12 years. And therefore, in 24 years, will be 4 times our per capita income. Today, the per capita income in India is, just a little below $2,500 per person. Multiply by 4, we get $10,000 per person. Today, China is at $13,000 per person, Korea is at $35,000, and the United States is north of $60,000. So if you do the math at our current rate of growth, strong as it is, highest in the G20, we don't get rich. In fact, we stay lower middle income till 2047. Of course, we want to be better than that, but one of the worries is we will be reaching the end of our demographic dividend by that time. If all goes well, we're already seeing some southern states growing at below reproduction rate. In other words, the fertility rate has fallen below reproduction rate. We are slowing our growth. That may happen with some of the northern states also that are at this point increasing their population really fast. In other words, we will start the process of aging at some point around that time, which leads to the alarming question: if we don't grow faster, we will grow old before we grow rich, which means we'll have all the burdens of an aging population to deal with also at that point. Now, why am I looking at the dark side? I'm looking at the dark side to say we have a lot to do. We have not done everything. We have not accomplished everything. We have a long way to go because the current pace of growth is not enough. It's not enough to employ all those who are entering the labor force. It's not enough to make us get rich before we get old. We have to up the rate of growth. And if you look around us in the popular discourse, what is the single most issue that exercises our youth? We saw some examples of that in the last few days in Parliament. It is jobs, jobs, and jobs. They desperately want those jobs because we are seeing we have a population dividend. A lot of young people are entering the labor force, but we're not able to employ them. So, on the one hand, we have a need for jobs. On the other hand, we have a need for strong growth. Is there something that can bridge this gap? Now, how did countries typically employ their people? They did it by growing the manufacturing sector. And, typically they went from agriculture, they generated agricultural surpluses, productivity increased in agriculture. People left agriculture to go into manufacturing. And typically they started at the lowest end of manufacturing, assembly. And then because they were competing with richer countries, because they had the advantage of cheap labor, they generated profits in manufacturing and reinvested it, building more capital in manufacturing, educating their workers more, and they moved up the value chain. Eventually, as they became richer, they moved from manufacturing to services. Today, rich countries are largely service economies. 70% of workers in rich countries typically do service jobs. Maybe 20% does manufacturing, 5% construction, 5% agriculture. That's a quick split. So which way should we go? Should we follow the old way, the manufacturing-led growth, or should we think of something which is going to get us to our goal faster? Because if we go on the manufacturing path, we're going to follow countries like Korea, China, etc. They grew very fast. But we have to ask ourselves, is that path that easy today? I'll come to that in a second. But let me describe what the typical global supply chain looks like today for a product that many of you have. And that's the iPhone, okay? How does the iPhone get made? think about the processes along the way for an iPhone. It starts first with scientists, engineers, designers dreaming up the iPhone. Remember Steve Jobs? That was what he did in Cupertino, which is Apple's headquarters in California. He dreams up the iPhone with a bunch of designers and scientists and engineers. Lots of intellectual property goes into it, lots of innovation, that even the shape of the iPhone is patented by Apple because it has a special significance. So that's the first part of the global supply chain, when you dream up the product. And that's where a lot of value is added to the product. Then you go down the supply chain and you get to production. Production is very, very competitive, because initially it used to be the emerging markets competing with the industrial countries. Industrial countries rarely manufacture anything anymore. It's assembled, built, etc. in the developing world. The last product that Apple manufactured was in 2004. Since then, it's all been outsourced to, its suppliers, Foxconn being most prominent. So there is something called the smile curve, which represents how much value added is at each point in the supply chain. I've already talked about why you see one end of the smile. The value added is very high in the initial parts when you're thinking about ideas, creativity, you're creating the product. Then as you go into production, you reach the valley, the bottom of the smile curve, because this is the most competitive area in the supply chain. This is where Foxconn is, Apple is at the left peak. But as you go further in the supply chain, you get closer to the final consumer. And once again, Apple takes over, because the marketing, the finance, the advertising, the Apple stores, the iTunes stores, the app stores, all that is owned by Apple. Okay, once again, this is highly value added. A lot of it is services. And that's the other end of the smile curve. It goes up once again from the valleys. So if you think of the global supply chain, it looks like a smile curve. Lots of value added on both sides, very little in the middle. What does that mean? That means if you're looking to capture the areas where there's value added, go for the extremes. If you want to enter the most competitive area, go to the middle. Okay? Historically, it was the case you had to go to the middle, because emerging markets started off by competing in manufacturing with the industrial world. As I said, you generated profits there, then went up the value chain. Today, it's really very competitive there, but you can enter the plateaus directly. A lot of value added via design, creativity, intellectual property, and some of the marketing, advertising is done in India today, without us capturing the value at all. What do we mean by that? I mean, take, for example, chips. By some metrics, 20% of chip design is done in India. That's the plateau, except it's owned by a US company employing Indian workers who do the chip design. So if we really want to capture value added, if we really want to capture the richest parts of the value chain, not only have we got to do the intellectual property, the design, as well as the marketing, finance, but we also have to do it for an Indian company, so that the property rights, the profits stay in India. We've got to create Indian champions in these areas, right? So that is one example of how the world has evolved. The world has evolved so that value is there. That is why Apple, on a good day, its market value is $3 trillion. On a good day, Foxconn's market value is $50 billion. Apple is worth 60 times Foxconn. It's worth 60 times the entity that does all the manufacturing for Apple. And that's why I think when we look at where we want to be in order to grow faster, we have to think of what works for us. We don't need to go down the old path of manufacturing and then moving steadily up the value chain. We are already in some of the high value added services. And what we have to think about is how do we build on this advantage, okay? So, if you think about manufacturing today, it's not your father's manufacturing or your grandfather's manufacturing. It's not the, Model T Ford assembled together on an assembly line. If you look at today's car, example Tesla, looks more like an iPhone than a car. Yes, there are parts that are assembled together, but there are 40 million lines of code embedded in a Tesla. Again, products today are a combination of hard stuff and a lot of services embedded in that manufacturing. I'll give you a couple more examples in just a while. But basically, we need to think about what we want to capture. And typically, the services component is both more labor intensive as well as typically more valuable than the manufacturing component. Now, I told you I would say why the old manufacturing path. So I've made 2 points. One, we don't need to go through the old manufacturing path to become a rich country. We can go directly to some of the most value-added parts of the supply chain. We just have to generate more of our intellectual property and more design here, more products which we own, and we will capture those parts. That's number one. Number two, the old export-led manufacturing path is much harder today, partly because we're no longer competing with the US, with the well-paid US worker where we can use the cheap Indian worker as labor arbitrage. That's gone. That's been done by China. Today, when we compete for manufacturing, we're competing with the Chinese worker, with the Vietnamese worker. And therefore, the profits are much, much lower. That's why Foxconn is not worth that much relative to Apple, because it's very, very competitive. So one reason manufacturing is much harder is China got there first. Chinese workers in many situations are better trained. There are some advantages of Indian workers we talk about in this book, but for commodity manufacturing, it's very hard even today to beat China. So that's one reason. The second reason it's hard is the world has woken up to a desire to keep manufacturing in their own country. And so you see protectionism increase significantly in manufacturing. Of course, we already see the US-China tariff war, but there is more. Ever since the pandemic, you've seen protectionist measures go through the roof. The world is not ready for another China, another 1.4 billion people entering manufacturing and killing their manufacturing establishments, right? I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's much harder than when China did it, because the world has woken up to the dangers of letting their manufacturing completely go outside. Dangers, or they really don't want that to happen. And third, of course, increasingly what we're seeing is even, most manufacturing is now not that labor intensive. There's a lot more automation going on in manufacturing. So to employ the many millions that we have is going to be also harder now, given that robots, any car factory is full of robots. Yes, there is some assembly still involved, but it's generally small. So the bottom line here is manufacturing, export-led manufacturing is becoming harder. We should try. And I will talk in a second about how we can go about it. But it's becoming much harder. And to capture the lowest end of that and hope to move up is just very, very difficult. Instead, we're already in high value-added services. Today, we have people being hired in Hyderabad. I mean, I just, on the road here, you look at all the companies that are here. Many of them are hiring our best graduates to provide services directly in the rest of the world. It used to be IT services. Recently, the fastest growing component of services is consulting and management services provided from India. I met a consultant, partner in a big four firm in the UK, saying, I'm going back to India to set up our India operations. I said, you're going to target India? He said, no, we're going to target customers in the UK. I said, well, so this is the back office? He said, no, it's a front office. What we've learned is that we can actually provide services directly from Edinburgh to London, or from Chicago to Denver over the pandemic, the beauties of Zoom and WebEx. But if we can do that, and if you don't have to actually physically be present, why can't you do it across nations? And that's why what we have today is the possibility of providing those services directly. I told you the labor arbitrage in manufacturing is gone because we're competing with cheap workers everywhere else. Where the labor arbitrage is not gone is in services, because our consultant here, even the best paid consultant who you hire from school, from an ISB or a IIM Ahmedabad, costs you about $40,000. The equivalent consultant hired in the US is $200,000. 5 to 1. Where would you go to hire your consultants? If you could do it, you'd hire them there, mix them up with your team there so that they have the local knowledge from there, but that is a way you can grow fast as a company there, but you can grow fast as an individual here providing direct services, right? So the point is there is a lot of possibilities there, but I would also argue there's a lot of possibilities in new firms which combine services and manufacturing. And let me give you some examples from India. We talk about the firm Tilfi in the book. Who is Tilfi? A couple of graduates from business school in Switzerland, originally from India, decide to go back to India and work with traditional Banarsi sari weavers. Now, the problem that weavers have is that they always had to bear the risk. You spend 3 months weaving the sari, at the end of it, you have to sell it. If it doesn't sell, you don't eat. So when you have that kind of risk, what do? You focus on tried and tested designs, the same old designs on and on, because you know at least there's a small market for that. Everybody knows that's a Banarsi sari, it sells. Moreover, what happens with that kind of same old design is all the fake manufacturers understand that that's the design. That's what a Banarsi sari looks like. And they weave the sari on a machine, and you have a hand-woven sari which can't compete with a machine-woven sari. Nobody can tell the difference, at least nobody who's not expert, and so you get crowded out and you leave the business. What if instead they thought, we take the risk from the weaver, we actually buy the sari right off. You make the sari, it's ours. And then we help the weaver with new designs. The beauty about new designs, harder to fake quickly. I mean, the other guys have to learn what the design is, etc. New designs bring a new market. And then you stamp it with your brand, Tilfi, and you create a global market. They're selling Banarsi saris around the world. They have one shop, only one physical shop. It doesn't, I mean, it sells a reasonable amount, but really the main sales are done on their website. That's a way you combine services with manufacturing, in this case traditional manufacturing, and expand the market tremendously. So that's one. Second example of an Indian product that has succeeded, or is trying to succeed at this point, I won't say it succeeded, is Agnikul. I met one of the founders of Agnikul. He's a guy who worked for AIG, insurance company, for a large number of years, and his passion was always to be an astronaut. Of course, he realized it was too late to be an astronaut, but then he said, I saw Elon Musk, and I said, I want to build rockets. So he wrote to a bunch of IIT professors saying, I want to build rockets, will you work with me? One person, he says, was crazy enough to say yes. And so he went back to IIT Chennai, worked with this professor, and started building prototypes of rockets. There's one interesting aspect of it. It's all 3D printed. There's no manufacturing. Now, the beauty about 3D printed rockets is basically you can design all the systems, and if the printing goes well, there's no mistakes. The beauty about 3D printing is you can design, redesign, and change the parts. You don't have these fixed tools out there. Of course, you don't need a workforce that is huge. You need a 3D printing machine or 2 or 3, which is what they have. The only constraint is every part has to be 40 centimeters by 40 centimeters by 40 centimeters at its max, because it has to fit in the 3D printer. But that's what they're doing. And they're building customized rockets to send satellites into space up to a height of 400 kilometers, solid fuel rockets. That's another example of a fantastic new company, in this case, intellectual product, because they design it. You go to their factory in the IIT Chennai research campus, a lot of kids sitting on the floor typing away on their computers because they're setting up the control systems, the design, all of it being done in-house. We have the capacity to do that. They are getting some help from our fabulous ISRO, our public sector organization, which has just put the lander on the other side of the moon. But they're getting help, but that's not the main source of help. They're doing it themselves. And they're creating intellectual property. They're creating a product. That's example 2 that I want to talk about. Third example is an example which reflects what we're talking about when we say education is the key. And I'm going to come to that in a second. PC Mustafa is a man who's achieved a lot. I'll tell you what he's achieved in a second. But he grew up as a son of a laborer in Wayanad, Kerala. His father used to pick up ginger root, clean it, toss it onto a truck. That was what he used to do. Mustafa went to school, failed out in 6th grade, and went back to the farm and worked with his father. His father's a laborer. He also had the ambition of becoming a laborer. Teacher comes to the farm and says, Mustafa, what are you doing? I failed, so I'm back on the farm. Well, do you want to be like your father, or do you want to be like your teachers in school? Mustafa thought and said, well, I want to be like them. So he said, come back, give it another try. He goes to school, and his fellow students make fun of him. You're back, you failed, you're with us because they're 1 grade lower than him. You know how cruel children can be. And he's dejected. He goes to his teacher, Matthew sir, and says, sir, what should I do? And Matthew sir says, focus on one thing, do it well, and they'll come around. So Mustafa focuses on math, tops the class, which is quite a feat given his background, tops the class, then does fantastically well in school, joins NIT, does computer science, goes abroad, gets a job, comes back to India, joins IIM Bangalore, and says, I want to become an entrepreneur. What does he want to do? Looks around, he sees his cousin selling idli batter in plastic packets. Spoils fast, very little hygiene. Spends a year trying to figure out the right idli batter and the right packaging, and starts selling it as ID Fresh Foods. Today, some of you may be using ID Fresh Foods products. It's the lady out there. And they've branched out into so many other things. But it's a spectacular story of modern India, of how in one generation you can go from poverty to being a crorepati with the help of education. Dr. Reddy will remember, we in the RBI have class 4 employees. What are they? They're at the bottom of the government circle. Every year we have a party for the children of the class 4 employees, and they bring their children. And it is astonishing to see what they are doing. One child is a manager in a bank. The other child is working for Infosys. They have made the transition from lower middle class to upper middle class in one generation. Again, because their parents have a good job at the RBI, not a great job, but a secure job, can pay for their schooling, and schooling is the way forward. So, Where am I heading? I'm saying that India can make the leap onto the plateaus without going through the valley. By all means, I'm not saying we shouldn't get manufacturing jobs. We should, if they come. But we don't need to follow the old path that others did. But to follow the new path, we have to do three very important things. The first is we need to fix our governance so that our political system focuses on producing better social goods, public goods, such as health, such as education, instead of focusing on giveaways. We need to transform the system so that it provides what the people need. One of the big factors in transformation is decentralization. Again and again, you see the governments that are more decentralized do far better in offering public goods, and there are actually research papers written on this. One example is Delhi government, which has focused on improving the quality of the schools, so much so that the government schools are now beating the private schools in exams. They also have set up healthcare systems with the Mohalla clinic and the tiered system. These are examples of what can go well. Kerala is another example. So we need to focus on public good provision, the decentralization, many other things we think should happen. That's part of the book. I cannot tell you the whole book. I would suggest you read it. The second is we need to improve our human capital. We absolutely need to deal with the problems of today. Today we have 35% malnutrition amongst our children. This is the workforce of Amrit Kal. This is the workforce which is going to join the labor force in 2042, 43 and going to be part of the labor force. Many of you know what malnutrition does. It stunts the brain, stunts health, makes you incapable of working as a full-fledged worker. How can we be a developed country if 35% of our workers at that point have had a miserable childhood and have not grown to be fully productive members of society because of that childhood? Malnutrition is a shame for this country. We have to go into mission mode to eradicate it. It has been done. We offer examples in the book. It needs to be done if we want to have any hope of taking the bulk of our population with us. But also, we need to improve higher education. We've got great schools, great universities, not one university in the top 100. Our research is good. It needs to be great if we want to occupy the plateaus. We had a fantastic university for its time, the Indian Institute of Science. It still is a great university, but relative to other universities at which it was on par with those, they have gone ahead, it hasn't. We need to create many more first-class universities which train the teachers, do the research, which will power our country. So that's point 2, improve human capital across the board. Again, read about it in the book. And that leaves point number 3. What is the third element? And that's we need an entrepreneurial, creative, innovative society to capture the plateaus rather than stay in the valley. Again, lots of suggestions based on stuff that has worked. So to conclude, what I want to say is we're not offering a pipe dream. We're saying that we've done a lot of this. Only thing is we need to multiply it by 100 or by 1,000. We need 1,000, maybe 100,000 Mustafas. How do we get that? And that's really what we need to aim for if we want to get rich before we get old. It is possible. It's the outline of the way. Last point, and I'll stop, which is consistent with what you've been talking about in Manthan. If we want to go towards that creative, innovative, idea-based economy, we absolutely need to depend on what is our greatest strength, democracy. What we have, what other countries like China and Vietnam don't have. We have also the English language, but more than the English language is our democracy, which is what will keep us creative, what will keep us energized. If we, study after study says, with a democracy, with the free speech, the freedom to think, you have a much greater ability to generate the ideas, to generate the debate, to generate the intellectual property. You might say, you know, I'm happy to get scientific discovery, but I don't want political opposition or reaction. It doesn't work that way. You can't take scientific radicalism while killing political radicalism. That same youth who's protesting on the streets because they don't like the kind of country we're going towards can also be your Steve Jobs, who's thinking about creativity and has long had, looks like, you know, what we used to call a hippie, but he's also a radical, essentially rejecting the system and creating the first Apple computer. You cannot have one versus without the other. Look at the successful countries in terms of intellectual property. Again and again, you will come with the answer. It's typically free, democratic. That's the kind of country which attracts the thinkers and the seers and the radicals. And radicalism is part of the package deal. You can't take one versus the other. So let me stop there and say, what we've tried to do is give you an outline of what the book is about. It's an Indian way to grow, based on India's strengths. It rejects the idea that we have to turn our back on what we are and go back to being a more authoritarian country to pursue the Chinese manufacturing way. It basically says that's a dead end. Let's not go there. Let's think about how we do it our way.
That was a fascinating introduction to your book, which I think you outline in a very brief 20 minutes, the contents of the book. Before I ask a question to Rohit, I just like to tell the audience that the book is actually 3 parts, which Professor Rajan has given you an idea of. The first is about the importance of services, services-centered manufacturing as a strategy for growth. The second part is about governance, which again he touched upon, but in the book there's a lot of different aspects of governance. The third, if we might say so, was actually my favorite, which is a conversation with the reader about many issues that exercise people, about whether India is the fastest growing, whether we have to deal with redressal or retribution for 1200 years of slavery, whether about polygamy, etc. It's a fascinating conversation with an imaginary reader. And if I may suggest, you should really have a newspaper column, both of you. And if I can cheekily suggest, you can call it Dear WhatsApp Uncle. And then, so anyway, that was my favorite chapter, rather it was the icing on the cake.
You know, just on that, if I may add.
Just see if you can be heard. No?
Can you hear? Yeah, so, you know, just, you know, we were inspired by, to write that chapter by the Mahatma, because if you read Hind Swaraj, it's actually a conversation between what Gandhi calls a reader and an editor. And once we kind of got talking about the idea, we got so excited that we thought that we should write the whole book in the form of a Q&A between a reader and editor. But, you know, I think, you know, our editor Radhika, she made, you know, her sense prevail, and she said, well, you should first present your model and then have a discussion between why you think that model is better.
Okay, to get to the core message of the book about services, I want to ask you, you know, since you wrote the book and even as we speak, things are changing with generative AI, more commonly known as ChatGPT. And we know that many activities are going to change, and there is much speculation that services which can be easily routinized, those are the ones which will be affected the most and which are likely to see job losses. Now, I'm not talking, I mean, you talk about high-end services, but services are, of course, so many things. And it's not just transcribing or record keeping that's going to be changed. So there's a lot of uncertainty, of course, but would generative AI kind of put half a question mark about the strategy that we are now talking about pushing services in India, where in recent years the strength has been in these routine services?
Absolutely. So I think we're very upfront about this in the book, that AI presents a challenge, but I think it also presents an opportunity. So we must absolutely account for the fact that certain jobs are going to just go away. There is no two ways about it, and there's already interesting research coming up showing which jobs are being affected the most and which jobs are being affected the least. I think 2 quick points, and I'll let Raghu build on that. One is that I think historically we've seen that whenever a new technology comes, we kind of overestimate how quickly it will impact the labor market than it actually does, and we have many examples of this. Second, whenever a technology becomes more accessible, its demand also increases. So all of you may remember, at least I was young enough, when the first computer came, we used to have this floppy drive that we used to put in the computer, right? So what do I mean by that? Memory was very expensive, right? You could put like 2 or 3 files on it and so on. But as we made tremendous progress on making memory and data more accessible, a whole host of industries emerged around the fact that memory was cheap, including Uber, which some of you may have taken to come here, and so on. So, a more sort of economist way of saying is that as marginal cost of some product becomes low, its demand actually becomes high. And third, we think of this, at least in the book, as actually the reason why we must become even more obsessive about the second part of the book, which is improving the human capital of our people, because it is clear that the best workers of the near future, and definitely of the far future, are going to be ones that combined technology and manpower together better. So only technology and only manpower is going to be beaten by a combination of technology and manpower. So yes, certain jobs are going to be taken away, and you're absolutely right that certain routine jobs may be taken away, but it's very difficult to present an actual number, but a lot more jobs are going to be added, and I think the route that we suggest in the second part of the book becomes even more important.
Just to add to that, I mean, Claudia Golden won the Nobel Prize this year. With her husband, she's written a very important book, The Race Between Technology and Education. And that summarizes the point that as technology improves, often, not always, often what it does is it takes care of the routine jobs, which means you have to move up to do the non-routine stuff. And that gives you a breather. As you get more capable, as you get more creative, as you get more educated, you're able to use technology as a support, and you're not displaced by technology, right? So AI is just like any other technology. Of course, it's being hyped as it'll do everything at this point. My guess is we'll discover it can do some things. It can be very supportive in others, and it'll do some things very badly, and you'll never use it for that. That's true of every technology. So what it means is it displaces some jobs, it kills some jobs. It is an aid to some jobs. I mean, many of us thought once we have Excel to calculate for us, a whole set of jobs, accountant adding up the left-hand side and right-hand side of the balance sheet would go away. Yes, that job went away, but the accountant became much smarter about how to devise, how to do the accounting in a more creative way, for example. Not necessarily the best thing in the world. But the point here is that as technology improves, it becomes a support to a variety of professions. But sometimes it also creates a whole set of new jobs that weren't possible earlier. You have grown up with the internet. Data analytics, working with big data was not a job earlier because you didn't have that data. Today we collect enormous amounts of data, and every marketing department worth its salt has 4 or 5 people versed in big data. That's a new job that didn't exist before. I'm told the latest job with ChatGPT is that of GPT prompter. That's the person who gives the two words that you get a GPT answer from. If you really want a nice response from GPT, you have to ask the question properly. And that's what these people are trained in. This is a trite example, but it's saying there's a lot more that can be done. Last point. We always think the pace of technology will be faster than it actually is. Remember 4 or 5 years ago, we thought self-driving cars would be everywhere. It's still, 5, 10 years in the future. We thought there'll be no job of trucker because all trucks would be self-driving. Not happened yet. We want a lot more from technology before we allow it to roam on its own. So I think that perhaps some of the worries may be overblown, despite how amazing, every time you encounter this AI, how amazing it looks.
Just one on that point. It also represents the industry that you mentioned also represents a huge opportunity for India, just at a practical level in comparison to, let's say, East Asia or Latin America, because at last count, when we looked at the data, 58% of all web internet is in English. And all AI stuff is trained on existing data. So there's going to be a lot of path dependence, and we do have a unique advantage in comparison to many comparable countries.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be some questions on this. To move on to the second part of the book, as it were, about governance. Of course, you covered so many things, health, education, vocational training, etc. One aspect, Professor Rajan did speak about the Mohalla clinics of Delhi and the state initiatives. Something I found that you talk about decentralization, the discussion of the states seems to be a little limited, in the sense that we know that the states are in the forefront of improving health, education. They should be, but we are also at a time when there's so much centralization taking place, and the states' rights are in some sense being restricted. Now, how does one fashion a strategy which brings the states center in policy making, given a certain political setup?
Well, I think your question is the current trend in the right direction? And the answer is, we think not. We think centralizing at this point is the wrong direction to go. And remember, it's not just centralizing towards Delhi, it's within Delhi centralizing towards the Prime Minister's office. That basically is not how you can govern a complicated country like ours. And I think the flip side of it, decentralizing, is certainly the way to go. I think every finance commission decentralized. Dr. Reddy's chairmanship was a classic example where in one swoop, he did a big jump in decentralization. Unfortunately, now we seem to be going backwards. But I think we, hopefully, the impetus will reassert itself, because we simply cannot govern this country entirely from, think about it. The state of Uttar Pradesh, 240 million people, is the 5th largest country in the world, okay? It's 2/3 the size of the United States. The United States has 50 states. Within those 50, together with those 50 states, they're subdivided into 3,000 plus counties and so many cities. Each city has a mayor. Each county has a county commissioner who heads it. It is much more decentralized than we are. And we have to think about whether that accounts for some of their success. We centralized early, we talk about it in the book, because we were perhaps afraid of breaking up. National integration was the issue of the moment when we became free and put together our constitution. But the constitution had the directive principles in which decentralization, the third layer of government, was always there as something that would be good. We did decentralize in the 90s with the constitutional amendments. We created the third layer. But as economist Raj Chellaya says, everybody wants to decentralize up to their level. So that's what's happened with the states. The states have been reluctant for the most part to decentralize further. We need that to happen, but we certainly do not need the center to take back the powers that it has devolved, and the funding and the functions it's devolved to the states.
There's also in terms of China, there's a popular misconception. Obviously, China is controlled by one party and there's a centralization. But if you read the literature closely, if you look at the research in China, what comes out very clearly, what we describe in the book, is almost kind of a competitive cronyism. There is, the Financial Times bureau chief there had called it a Darwinian competition almost between different cities to get industry. And in fact, within the Communist Party, people were promoted from the lower rungs of the party who were able to deliver growth. If you go to set up a factory in China and you're coming with enough capital, you will be met at the airport of the city of that city by 4 different mayors who handle different aspects of the economy for their city. It is decentralized to that level. So both in terms of governance and in terms of growth policies, we think there is no substitute to decentralization.
One last question, many, but I think must leave it to the audience. A running current through the book is that if we have to succeed, we need more creativity. We also need, linked to creativity is freedom of thought, freedom of expression. We need less centralization. We need, in a way, 100 flowers bloom, as it were. And yet, everything that's happening now in the past few years has been in the opposite direction. And your last chapter, last couple of pages, you talk about, we have to fight change, and each one of us has to do what we can. Are we then saying that unless the broad political dispensation changes, we are not going to succeed?
I think what we're saying is the direction in which we are going, we believe is the wrong way. And we wanted to give an integrated sort of, going back to what Rohit said earlier, you need a plan to beat a plan. What we have currently is a very clearly articulated plan at the national level. We just disagree with it fundamentally. And so we thought it's important to articulate another plan and say why our plan is better than that plan. And to some extent, we were trying to anticipate the arguments of the other side in that last chapter which you liked, where we were saying, here is the view of the opposition to our plan. We articulated the plan in the first 2/3 of the book, and then had the objections to the plan being raised by somebody who believes in the current dispensation. And we tried to argue. Of course, it's a very stylized way of arguing. But I think there is value to having that debate in this country. Whose plan is better? Now, unfortunately, the environment is such that we don't have a debate. We have fingers pointed at each other. You're saying something different from what I'm saying, therefore you must be anti-national. That is not the way you have a debate, right? And for a country which has a unique history of sorting things out, I think it's actually going against our ethos. Part of why we wrote this book is we think it's high time we have a much better dialogue, at the very least amongst intellectuals, which I see in this room, but then beyond that to the broader public. And unless the intellectuals have a free and frank debate, and I'm sure you've had this in every one of your meetings, but we want to add a little bit more, thoughts that will hopefully enrich your discussions. But we think this discussion is extremely important, not just to preserve the soul of the nation. You say soul, who cares about soul? It's also about our well-being. If you don't care about soul, at least care about your well-being. And so that's why we integrated the economics and the politics and the philosophy, because we think they all hang together. And that's why you should care about all of it.
My plea I see a lot of younger people here is, just please engage with the ideas. Don't engage with the identities. Rohit has written something, Raghu has written something. If I may say, let the old fogies,
The WhatsApp uncle.
WhatsApp, just engage with the ideas, even if you disagree with them. Raghu and I wrote a book. We often disagreed, and we discussed and we came to a consensus. it's okay to disagree, but don't question. Even if someone you completely disagree with, don't question obviously unless there is a call to violence or anything. Don't question the intention of the person. Please try to engage.
Hello, my name is Dinesh. I have a question.
We'd like to take as many questions as possible. We'd only request that the questions be brief and to the point. And if I may discriminate, I'll discriminate in favor of younger people who are here for whom this book has been written. So please, you have the mic first, but please, a very brief question.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question about the human capital. When we talk about we're talking about a consulting, how many number of ISBs or NITs or IITs we have in India? This first thing. Second thing is, there's a manufacturer, so what about them? So even when it comes to education, I'm not a fan of a communism, but the private industry in China supports a lot to the schools there. If you look at in India, the NRSA, National Remote Sensing Agency,
is a small minority. Absolutely. We need to multiply it 10, 20 times, but that's not where the majority is going to get the job. Much of the book is how do we improve the quality of even your high school graduate. That's what the book is also about. It's saying you're not going to get manufacturing if you don't have well-trained high school graduates. A lot of the manufacturers we met are saying, where are the workers? In a country with 1.4 billion people, they can't find workers. That means our education and skilling system is just not working. What's that? You're offering one piece of the puzzle. There are lots of pieces of this puzzle. Read the book. You will see the pieces connected.
Just very
but
quick.
the point is, it has to be across the board. This is not about just getting a good job for the ISP graduate. It's about getting a good job for that laborer also. And there are lots of jobs that can be available, but we need to work on the fundamentals. Because
I think that a lot of people will have a question about education human capital. One document that we request, Raghu and I are big fans of, we agree, almost all things written in there is a national education policy. I think it came out in 2020 by this government. It's a fantastic document. I think all of us, whether citizens or civil society members or government officials, should just be obsessed with the national education policy. And it has a lot of good suggestions on the lines of what the gentleman is saying, right from early education challenge all the way up to vocational training and higher education.
In your two esteemed opinions, would it be fruitful to initiate a conversation in our institutions to reassess its position as the prime metric for success and to identify alternatives?
So, as you know, it doesn't count the labor of people working at home, for example. It doesn't count the ills that are produced, pollution, etc. I mean, there's so many things it doesn't measure. But it's sort of what people have latched on to, and as a result, it's a poor but still the most commonly accepted indicator. We could do better, but I think at this point, let's also make sure that at least that is moving forward.
Yeah, Gauri.
Thank you, Professor Rajan and Professor Lamba. Disclaimer, I'm not an economist, so my questions may sound a little naive. One of the questions I had was, in the growth model and the paradigm that you've proposed, how do we include or co-opt sustainability into it? And for example, when you listen to people like Naomi Klein or something, like you have limited natural resources, and how do you kind of then deal with this kind of a growth model? Second question, given that, okay, we are significantly an agrarian economy, I mean, agriculture is still a major part of our economy, how do we bring in innovation and especially if you're going through organic farming, we want to kind of go into healthier, which is labor intensive. How do we bring in innovation and technology there? And my third question is in education and...
Two questions, enough. Many people, many questions.
This is the thing that we're really trying to push conceptually and have these ideas kind of at least, if not accepted, at least understood. that there is a cookie cutter model, as you rightly point out, that most countries, before they're rich, they start off as being mostly agrarian, and it's backbending work, and the productivity per person is very low. There are too many people working on a field when only 2 will do, especially if they're working with machines, right? And so the traditional route was to go from there to low-scale manufacturing, because typically also when you're poor, your human capital level is not very high. What is remarkable about India, and we must all appreciate it, is that India was able to, for a variety of reasons that we discuss in the book, go from agriculture being the largest component of, both in terms of employment and in terms of output, total output, to services, and largely high-skilled services occupying that space. Now, why it happened, we can go into that debate, but given that we are there, we are exporting services to the world, we are being very creative in embedding services in manufacturing, given the examples that Raghu suggested. All we are saying is that it doesn't make sense politically, societally, or economically to turn that bus back. So you should try to capture the high ends in the value chain. That does not mean that you should not, as you're rightly pointing out, India has so much labor, it cannot all be absorbed in high-skilled services. So a large part of it will go to low-skill manufacturing and low-skill services. But if we control the high ends of the value chain, we can also nudge how and in which direction and where we absorb the rest of the employment, and we may not even have to give so much subsidies that we talk about in the book.
We talk in the book about innovation in agriculture. There's lots of scope for innovation in agriculture, lots of scope of bringing technology in agriculture. So the creative thinking economy is also about agriculture. It's also about manufacturing. It's also about services. The underlying commonality is we improve our human capital to bring that thinking to all these areas. To your first question, we absolutely need to think about the environment. We need to think about sustainability of our growth. And we have the opportunity to do that because we're going, we're creating a fresh path. In fact, one of the advantages of the service path is we don't become the polluting workshop to the world and create yet more pollution in our country. We become services much more sustainable. And that's where the developed countries are. But the last point is we do talk about climate and what India's position should be. We think we need to be a little more aggressive because where climate hits is first in South Asia. And we have to acknowledge that.
Also to do that, one of the best, one of the reasons, and we mentioned this in the book, we were the centers of the Green Revolution because we had excellent agricultural universities. We have forgot about we haven't invested in our agricultural universities with that kind of purpose as we did in the 60s. Where are the ideas going to come from? They're going to come from our universities.
Rohit, we need shorter answers now.
Yeah, I'm here. The mic is here. Yeah. So I have two questions. You mentioned Apple, manufacturing high-tech products like Apple or auto manufacturing sectors. And the other question I have is there any contradiction between being a manufacturing superpower and being a more decentralized, independent, and democratic state or institution?
And for reasons that we describe in the book, it is just much easier to condense a large amount of manufacturing growth in a limited period of time if you have a centralized authoritarian regime. You remember US and the UK grew over 200 years slowly at a rate of 2-3%, and which is what brought them here. China did this in 30 years. For that you need to acquire land, you need to ensure certain kinds of goods, which are obviously harder when you have a democracy. There's no two ways about that. But that doesn't mean we should go down that route. And I think the ecological answer was, answered by Raghu in the answer to the last question.
By the way, I want to emphasize this book is not aimed at economists. We've talked the jargon of economists, but the attempt is to reach intelligent people. So it's lots of examples, and what we say is, something that should be easily understandable to everyone here.
I can tell you one thing. You have reached very intelligent people in Manthan.
So in Dr. Rajan, in your amazing introductory speech earlier, you mentioned the labor force participation rate and the social hierarchy is holding us back as a nation. And as a nation of so many different divisions based on caste, religion, gender, etc., what is the role of social justice in taking India forward? What reforms to the third pillar have to happen in order for that to
Many
happen?
expressions in this country. Women's inequality, for example, the inequality of disadvantaged communities, and increasingly the inequality of minorities, religious minorities, that we need to make sure doesn't happen. So there's a lot we talk about in the book in terms of inequality and how we need a more just system. And I don't know whether that falls within your sort of acceptable limits of social justice, but we're talking about systemic change to create a more inclusive, sustainable growth for India. And I think we need to bring all our people to engage in that, because that's the way we move forward in the most effective way.
That lady there.
Good evening. Thanks to Manthan for promoting. Of course, completely agree that education is the way to bridge the gap and grow rich before you grow old. But how can we include the differently abled and bring them at par? Because are we really investing? Is the investment towards the development of the unincluded deteriorating, or is there a way we can pick that up and merge it with our manufacturing combined with services?
You know, I mean, what you're asking about is, and that's the role of government, to provide a safety and support to the weakest in society, even while giving the opportunities for the best to succeed, right? And so, I mean, we haven't talked specifically about all the varieties of disabilities in the system, but I think the point is well taken, that we need to do more across the board.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. The economy slumps into recession. Do you agree with this statement? My another question, do you think Australian economy will step into recession by early next year?
He knows you've got me. Look, I don't think there are any easy formulas on when we go into recession. So I don't think what you just said is necessarily right. And Australian, you wanted it to go into recession or recovery?
Will it go into recession?
Are you going to be a student there?
That's very interesting.
Huh? You're going to work there? Okay. Migrate. You know, a recession is small in the nature of migration. If you're going to migrate, you know, it'll be 1 or 2 years in the next 40. But, you know, think about all the advantages of staying in India also.
With the end of ideas and in the end of consumer markets, with the example of Apple and Foxconn. But what is the quantum of opportunity in terms of how many apples can be created versus how many Foxconns can be created with respect to manufacturing that could appeal to India's wide population base? The second thing is, what would ideally be the right way to measure the progress of a country as a whole?
So let me take this very quickly, and then so we're saying two things. One, yes, we need to create jobs for the moderately skilled, right? But they need not all be in manufacturing. There are a tremendous number of jobs being created in services for the moderately skilled. We're not just talking about ISP grads. That sweeper on the street is a moderately skilled service worker. She can become really productive if she drives a vacuum cab which hoovers up the dirt. That's what they do in industrial countries. It makes her life safer. It makes her job more productive. We can do that. Some municipalities are doing that. The largest growing job in India at one time used to be the security guard. That's a moderately skilled service job. I can multiply this 100-fold. Services is a place that has employed people. The number of jobs in services has grown as a fraction of total jobs. It has remained stagnant in manufacturing. Not to be pessimistic about manufacturing, but I'm saying everybody here thinks that manufacturing is going to employ. It hasn't for the last 40 years. What has employed people is services. Now, that said, it's moderately qualified services. Second point, and then I'll... one is to create jobs for the people we have. The other is to create people for the jobs that we need. And our book is about both. There are lots of new jobs we can create for our needs of the future for the people we have. For example, get that 10th class mother in a village to teach the kids in the Anganwadi about alphabets. She's past 10th class, she knows how to do that. That's a job, but that also improves the quality of education our poor kids get, because they learn alphabets, they learn math at an early age. That's a job which can employ 1 million plus. There are many other examples of that. So I think what we're saying is we need to work at all ends of the spectrum.
Yeah,
You know,
yes.
we must actually aspire to make an Apple rather than Foxconn. I think there is no reason, and the example we give in the book is, which Raghu briefly mentioned, is 1/5 of all chip design happens in India. Actually, another statistic is that a large number of people making chips, designing chips all over the world, not just in India, are of Indian origin. So, you know, we must we have a huge talent pool, and if there is the right initiative, we should be aspiring to make Qualcomms and Nvidias in India.
Hindutva rate of growth. And the second question is, the general discipline levels of the nation when compared to, say, countries like China or Vietnam or Philippines is less in India. Is that going to be a factor in dealing with the workforce?
Sir, this is Sajid Pirzada here. I don't want to waste time. A small question I thought to just share with you. Thanks for your wonderful lecture. And there are more admirers and followers of Dr. Rajan here in Hyderabad. And you are in a very, very illustrious and historic place called MJ College of Engineering and Technology. So I have a very small thing. Thanks to Dr. Manmohan Singh, from agri-based economy to services sector to manufacturing sector, now to chip making, and now the wonderful idea which you have just shared all of with us, creative, innovative, idea-based economy. So in the backdrop of last 30 years, I think intellectual wealth creativity has risen enormously in India. If you agree with this, I think I need your input. Secondly, your idea that you have given a small example of a boy from Wayanad who used to manufacture whatever the product, food product. Now, give a very quick, best, beautiful answer. You are capable of delivering that. How about wealth creativity for the lower middle class and the middle class? That's the only question which, you know, millions and millions of Indians, I mean, those who are college dropouts from school level or from the college level, I think they are looking for it from your golden words. Thank you so much.
Creating wealth for people is for them to get a good job. If we can do that, I think we are on the way. I think the central question we have to focus on is how do we create those good jobs? And as I said, it's two sides. One, you create the job, but the other is you create the people. And you need both. And we need to work on both. It will have an effect. Sir, if I answer your question on Hindutva rate of growth, I will get trolled for the next 100 years. Better discretion is the better part of valor here.
Let me take that. No matter what name you want to ascribe to it, India must grow at double digits if it aspires to become middle income by 2047. If a name helps, and it's not discriminatory, fine. But really, labels don't matter. We really need double-digit growth to reach Amrit Kal.
It's about the Indian bureaucracy because there's a significant role that the entire government machinery plays increasing these wheels to make business possible, to make, employment generation easy for them. So here, it's two parts. One is our over-reliance on our champion bureaucrats who do great work. We have our living example, Y.V. Reddy sir here. And, IAS officers who do great work. We have our secretary sir to Agriculture Department, Raghuram sir. If we go and speak to the frontline, frontline workers, they call him once in a generation officer. So there is that, and there is all other officers who are not trained in places like Missouri, who just come after straight exam, right? So what about the capacity building of bureaucrats to align them for this kind of a development and growth model?
Okay.
And that's absolutely right. We need to do more of it, not just for the work within the country, but of course we've got to negotiate major treaties with the rest of the world. We need people who are trained in that, and I couldn't disagree with you that we need capacity building across the gamut.
One statistic we have which we found very interesting in the book is that Indian state is actually too fat at the top and too thin at the bottom. And so when you talk about bureaucracy, the front line, so we have lots of talent at the top, but we need a significantly larger state present at the local level.
Need of bridging the gender equality for India to prosper. But what do you really think the new age companies need to do differently to help our women enter the workforce, and more importantly sustain at the mid-age group where women of childbearing age really excel?
To find ways to structure work so that they become more women friendly, right? That they allow women, in many cases they have dual roles of looking after the family or starting a family and also working in the office. How do you enable them to manage that better? How do you create an environment where they can be super at all? At the same time, how do you create an expectation that there'll be much more sharing within the family of the work of looking after children, for example? So there are lots of ways we need to tackle this. One is at the family level, one is at the corporate level, one is at the societal level. For example, one of the big reasons we don't get participation is because of safety. In getting to work, safety in the workplace, that's something else we need to tackle. So lots to go, but I think if we have the will, we can certainly do a lot of what you want.
It's also the quality of growth. So if we know, for example, one thing we mentioned in the book is that it's well documented globally that a certain subset of industries employ women in much larger numbers. For example, textiles, apparel, leather, and we're just not doing enough. Actually, all these jobs are migrating to Bangladesh, Vietnam, and so on. So just the quality of growth, which way do you want to grow, and how can you grow in a women-friendly way really matters. And I just want to put this on record. Neha is a friend of mine, but we have amongst us Neha Agarwal, who at the age of 19 represented India in the Beijing Olympics in table tennis. So thank you for being
I have become old without growing rich, despite our education. But how do we stop the brain drain for the present generation? We have some lakhs of people leaving for working in America from Hyderabad. And the second question is about malnutrition. We get these, we don't have an FDA, and we get this baigan which is, genetically engineered. So there's no taste. And, talking about agriculture. So you get large banda gobis and large baigans in Hyderabad also. So there's how do we stop that malnutrition thing? So and the brain drain.
Empirically, it has been proved that
Rohit and I are accused of being part of the brain drain, right? I think the reality is, as we create better jobs here, better opportunities, the drain will stop automatically. Nobody wants to go abroad if there's a better job here. I'll give you an example of how this has changed. When I graduated, if you wanted to join a consultancy, you had to go abroad, get an MBA, and join a consultancy, because foreign consultancies were not employing anybody in India. If you wanted to see the world, you needed to get a scholarship and go outside. Today this happens as a routine. As a result, I don't see a lot of applicants from India to do a PhD in my school. It used to be there were lots. That's died down because of the quality of jobs in India. So we produce jobs, the drain will stop. You can't force people to stay behind, but you can attract them to stay.
They're taking $10,000 with them. It's actually much higher usually. That's around $7.5 billion. So what we're trying to say is that it's not just a problem of talent going abroad. Actually, it's an economic opportunity being lost. And that's all the more reason why we should actually be focusing a lot on building higher educational institutions of great, one like we are here, rather than subsidizing a lot of the other stuff that we're doing. It's a big misallocation.
Without a globally competitive bureaucracy.
We can't. Dr. Reddy was at the IMF for some time. I was at the IMF. we did not overlap that much, but what you see again and again is that who do other countries send to these international meetings? They're people who have spent 15, 20 years in that department, who have PhDs, who have acquired expertise, and you're negotiating with them. If you've just come into the job, you haven't got a lot of training, you don't have a lot of background, you've just been transferred as an IS officer to the trade department, and you're negotiating a trade treaty, you're negotiating basically with your hands tied behind your back and your feet tied with rope. You have very little ability to do a good job. We need to recognize that. When I was working in the finance ministry as part of the G20 framework working group, we were co-chairs with Canada. Canada had 7 full-time economists. I had 1 myself. So it's that asymmetric resources, asymmetric training, which puts us at a disadvantage. And so we have to recognize that if we are going to be a large power, I won't say superpower, that's still a long way away, we will get there someday, but a large power, which is what we are today, we have to have the bureaucracy, as Dr. Y.V. Reddy says, that is commensurate with that, which means trained, capable, and specialized. So Boris Johnson in the UK, I think we can do better than that.
I think we shouldn't test the patience, and I would recommend there at the corner of the table. Please buy the book, and we should not tire the authors too much. I have, I think, time only for one more question. Oops.
Been attending this, I mean, the answers have always been there, motherhood statements. Since my first economic class at IIM Calcutta in '85, okay, so not that, it's about you. Given your experience, your exposure, and diverse, global, wise, how, if you're not a pessimist, if you're not despondent, if you're not a cynical, how do you manage not to be one of those? I'm not using the word optimist and hopeful, okay, let me add, hopeless. How do you manage?
You are cynical, despondent, hopeless. You can't get up in the morning out of your bed. So you have to be the other. You have to hope that there is change. You have to hope that we turn around. You have to hope that we go back to rediscover what we were. So hope lives eternal in the human heart.
Thank you, Dr. Rajan, for giving the